The poet Juvenal wrote that in Rome, vice paid better tribute than an honest life. Behind the grand monuments and epic battle stories, a different kind of war was waged in bedrooms and banquet halls. The sexual world of ancient Rome was a complex system, often brutal, and completely inseparable from power, religion, and social control. By the end of this, you will see this celebrated civilization in a stark and unsettling new light. We will uncover how public spectacles turned violence into desire, and why some of the most sacred rituals involved acts we would find shocking today. What does it really mean when a society builds its glory on such foundations? Rome was a society obsessed with order. Every relationship, from the Senate floor to the family home, was a carefully staged performance of power, and nowhere was this more brutally clear than in the bedroom. The Roman sexual world was not built on our modern ideas of orientation or mutual affection. For them, it was a simple, stark equation of dominance and submission. The ultimate measure of a man was his virtus, his manly excellence and courage, and this virtue was proven not just on the battlefield, but through his sexual command. A true Roman man demonstrated his power by being the penetrator, the active partner, in any encounter. His partners, whether women, slaves, or social inferiors, were expected to occupy the passive, receiving role. This was the fundamental, unforgiving line in the sand. For a freeborn male citizen to be penetrated was to be feminized, to be shamed, to become less than Roman. It was a social death sentence that could strip him of respect and political standing. This rigid framework gave masters absolute sexual license over the people they owned. Slaves had no legal personhood, no right to their own bodies. Their consent was irrelevant, a concept that simply did not exist in the master-slave dynamic. A man's villa was his private domain, a theater where he could perform his dominance daily, reinforcing his status not just through wealth, but through this intimate control. His social standing was not a static title, it was a role he had to act out relentlessly, and his sexual conduct was the most telling performance of all. This obsession with power was not confined to private villas. It spilled out into the streets, transforming public spaces into stages for eroticized violence. The roar of the Colosseum crowd was not just for bloodshed, it was a complex chorus of desire and domination. Consider the gladiator. In the rigid social hierarchy, he was the ultimate outcast, a slave, a condemned man, or a desperate volunteer. He was legally defined as infamies without honor, and yet he was also a colossal sex symbol. Roman poets wrote of wealthy matrons abandoning their husbands for the muscled, sweaty allure of these arena fighters. The very blood and grime that marked them as social filth were seen by many as a potent aphrodisiac. He was both despised and intensely desired, a walking contradiction who embodied a raw, dangerous virility that proper Roman citizens were supposed to embody, yet could not help but covet. This public blurring of sex and violence took its most horrifying form in the executions staged during the midday lulls of the games. These were not simple beheadings. They were elaborate theatrical punishments designed to deliver a moral lesson through brutal spectacle. Female prisoners, often convicted of adultery or other sexual crimes, were sometimes forced into sexually charged deaths. Historical accounts describe them being raped by wild animals as a form of public penalty. The crowd did not look away. They watched as the state used sexual violence as a tool of justice, a terrifying public demonstration of what happened to those who transgressed social and sexual norms. It was control through horror, a message seared into the minds of every spectator. Even the theater offered no escape into pure art. The most popular form of entertainment was the pantomime, a solo performance where a masked dancer, accompanied by a chorus and musicians, acted out scenes from mythology. But these were not the sanitized stories we know today. They were explicit reenactments of the most salacious tales, the rapes of the gods, the seductions of nymphs, the violent passions of heroes. A single, agile performer would mime these graphic acts of violation and desire, leaving nothing to the imagination. The line between high art and public pornography was intentionally blurred. This was state-sanctioned sexuality, a commodification of myth that allowed the masses to indulge in taboo fantasies under the guise of cultural ritual. In the streets, in the arena, and in the theater, Rome constantly reinforced one brutal truth, that power, pleasure, and pain were forever intertwined. But this eroticized violence was only one side of the coin. To truly understand Rome, you must also look to its temples, where sexuality was not a vice but a sacred duty. The gods themselves demanded it. The line between the spiritual and the sexual was so thin it was often invisible. Take the festival of Lupercalia, a public ritual held every February. Teams of young noblemen, stripped naked except for belts made from a freshly sacrificed goat's skin, would run a course through the heart of the city. As they ran, they would laugh and lash out with strips of the goat hide, striking any women who came near them. Far from being an assault, this was a desperately sought blessing. Roman women believed these blows from the sacred thongs would cure infertility and ensure easy childbirth. In this chaotic, raucous public spectacle, the act of being struck by a nearly naked man was not seen as indecent. It was a divine intervention, a physical conduit for life-giving power. While Lupercalia was a public display, other rituals thrived in absolute secrecy, guarded from male eyes. The festival of the Bona, the good goddess, was an annual event held in the home of a high-ranking official like the consul. Men were strictly forbidden from attending, and even depictions of male creatures were removed from the house. Our knowledge of what happened inside comes entirely from male historians who could only speculate, often with salacious curiosity. They whispered about the respectable matrons of Rome abandoning their stern dignity, drinking potent wine from jars labeled as milk, and engaging in wild, ecstatic celebrations that might have included sexual rites. Whether these rumors were true or merely male anxiety about female-only spaces, the very mystery highlights a profound truth. For Roman women, sexuality could be a source of autonomous religious power, completely separate from the control of their husbands or fathers, a sacred secret for the benefit of the state itself. This fusion of sex and the divine raises one of history's most debated questions. Did sacred prostitution exist in Rome? The evidence points toward the cult of Venus, the goddess of love and fertility. Some historical sources and inscriptions suggest that within her temples, priestesses or devotees might have engaged in sexual acts as a form of worship and divine service. This was not seen as promiscuity, but as a powerful religious act. By channeling the goddess's own creative and fertile energy, these women were performing a vital function, ensuring the favor of Venus for the entire community, bringing blessings of abundance and prosperity to the fields, the flocks, and the families of Rome. What we might view as a purely physical transaction was, for them, a spiritual one, a direct line to the divine. The body itself was a temple, and its most intimate acts could be the highest form of prayer, a necessary ritual to keep the very world in balance. Yet even these public rituals and private mysteries could not compete with the ultimate symbols of corrupted power, the emperors themselves. The Imperial palace became a stage for the most extreme personal behaviors, where private vice had very public consequences. Take the brooding Emperor Tiberius, who shocked Rome by abandoning the capital to rule from the island of Capri. Ancient historians like Suetonius wrote that his retreat was not for quiet contemplation, but for indulgence beyond the prying eyes of the Senate. They whispered of a private pool where young boys and girls, called his little minnows, were trained to swim between his legs and nibble at him intimately. Whether these stories were true or political slander, they served a powerful purpose, painting Tiberius as a man who had abandoned his duty to the state for perverse, childish pleasures. Then there was Caligula, a name that has become synonymous with madness and excess. The rumors surrounding him were so extreme they often defy belief. He was said to have engaged in open incest with his sisters, flaunting these relationships at drunken banquets. He allegedly paraded his favorite prostitutes before his own wife, and even hatched a plan to appoint his horse Incitatus as a consul, dressing the animal in senatorial robes. Each of these acts, sexual or otherwise, was a direct assault on the established social order, a deliberate humiliation of the very institutions that gave his power meaning. But perhaps the most profound challenge to Roman values came from the young Emperor Elagabalus. He did not merely break sexual norms, he sought to shatter them completely. He publicly married a male slave and, according to ancient accounts, offered a massive reward to any physician who could surgically give him the body of a woman. This was not just a personal preference, it was a direct public rejection of the fundamental Roman principle that a true man must always be the active, dominant partner. For a ruler to desire to be the passive, the receptive, the feminine, was to undermine the very bedrock of Roman identity, so we must ask, how much of this is true? The further we get from the events, the more the stories spiral into outrageous tales told by their political enemies. Sexual slander was a potent weapon in Roman politics. To accuse an emperor of being sexually passive, of engaging in perverse acts, or of neglecting his public role for private pleasure was to argue that he was fundamentally unfit to rule. It was a way to dismantle his legacy after his death, to prove he lacked the virtus, the manly excellence required of a leader. These scandalous histories, true or exaggerated, reveal a society deeply anxious about the immense power concentrated in one man's hands, a power so absolute that the only way to critique it was to attack the most intimate aspects of his life. The terrifying sexual landscape of ancient Rome was not a descent into chaos, but a meticulously ordered system. It was a performance of power, a public spectacle, a sacred religious duty, and ultimately, a political liability for those at the very top. Each of these facets, from the master's bedroom to the emperor's palace, was a logical extension of a society built on three unshakable pillars: slavery, patriarchy, and militarism. In a world where human beings were property, where a father held the power of life and death over his family, and where the state's glory was measured in conquest, the body itself became a primary battlefield. What we see as perversion or terror was, for them, a necessary reinforcement of the social order. The rules were brutal, but they were clear, so this leaves us with a final, unsettling question. How does understanding the intimate, often shocking norms of a civilization, as foundational as Rome, change our own perspective on modern attitudes toward sex and power? We like to believe our views are enlightened and progressive, but the echoes of Rome's power dynamics still resonate in subtle ways today. What was the most surprising or disturbing revelation from this journey into the heart of an ancient mystery? Share your thoughts below, and if you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about history, subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of the past.